For close to 48 hours, IEBC Chairman Wafula Chebukati has remained mum on an issue he triggered through his Twitter account, the exact number of voters who cast their ballot in the Thursday repeat presidential election. While he initially pegged the turnout at 48% of the 19.6 million registered voters, which would translate to over 9 million voters, he quickly revised the figure to 6.5 million in subsequent tweets, raising questions.
48% was arrived at as a result of calculating the number of identified voters through the kits that transmitted the data between 4 and 5 p.m. as of that day, vis-a-vis the total registered voters in those polling stations where transmissions occurred.
The commission downplaying the turnout issue.
People are trying to divide the number of voters identified by the total number of registered voters, which is 19.6 million, which is the correct way to do it.
The votes garnered by President Uhuru Kenyatta and the other candidates in the repeat polls had overshot the 6.5 million turnout communicated by the chairman. Chebukati now seeking to clarify his position.
We were receiving the forms as they were coming in, and we were also tabulating the figure as the forms were coming in. So I can give you the exact figure as at that time. I don't have the data with me now, but there's a team working on it. Now, based on the forms which have been received, we are going to give you the exact figure of the total turnout. That is how many? 37,000? So at the time the figure of 6.5 went out, the forms were not 37,000, they were much, much less than 37,000.
The number of voters seeming at variance with the results transmitted from the polling stations through the Forms 34A.
The transmissions that are being done from the polling stations is not accurate in the sense that the transmissions that come from those kits will only tell us voters identified biometrically and voters identified through alphanumeric search. In other words, through ID card numbers.
The various methods used to identify voters were, according to the Commission, the reason for the varying numbers.
There is a complementary mechanism of voting whereby voters are allowed to vote as long as they are in the voter register, but they cannot be identified biometrically, neither can they be identified through the ID alphanumeric search. So this therefore means, in essence, the transmission by the kits will not be accurate in terms of numbers, absolute numbers. And for that reason, we are not going to rely on transmissions from the kits, but instead we will be using the transmissions via the Form 34Bs, which is arriving now.
The Commission holding that the final figures on the voter turnout would be tabulated once all the Forms 34B from the constituencies, accompanied by the over 37,000 Forms 34A, were physically delivered at the National Tallying Center. Francis Gashuri, Citizen Weekend.